I'm joined in the studio by community editor and columnist at The National, Shona Craver, and senior political correspondent at the Daily Express, it's Christian Calgie. I'm so glad you made it in today. The weather is causing all sorts of drama across the UK, but I think where we are, it's quite calm.
We're sheltered. That's all right.
But at least we can't say that for the papers, I'm afraid. We're going to start with the Mail, Christian, and defence spending. Talk us through what's going on and what Rachel Reeves is threatening.
Yeah, well, it's certainly the most sort of favourable Mail splash about Labour for quite a while. So yes, it's quite a wide-ranging interview, but she does touch on that she is hoping to set out a plan for 2.5% of GDP on defence, but also talking about the, let's be honest, the sort of crisis of when it comes to value for money and procurement for defence spending. There's also a fantastic sort of inside headline about winter fuel, saying she's cut her own mother's winter fuel, so she's no problem being tough on that point. And she wants to treat taxpayer cash with respect. And she's launching a very big audit of government spending to sort of do a line-by-line examination of everything that money is spent on and where cuts can be made. So it's quite Mail friendly. I think she says the right things on taxpayer cash. She certainly talks about how it's not government money, it's taxpayer money, and that's refreshing to hear a Labour Chancellor say. But you know, on the defence thing, I think she's certainly right that it all comes from what she describes as an envelope of government spending, so she can't spend more on defence without cutting other areas.
Yeah, and in an ever volatile world, lots of readers of the Mail will want her to commit to that target of spending 2.5 on defence.
Yeah, and we'll see some of the reasons why we need that in the next one. But I do enjoy these completely meaningless quotes where she says there's not some magic pot for any area of government spending. It has to come out of a spending envelope.
Oh, right.
I mean, these are just meaningless metaphors, so I don't know.
Whether
the envelope
it's a pot,
a bit smaller.
whether it's an envelope, the money has to come from somewhere.
Whether it's a money tree, I don't know where that's gone.
We could all do with one of those. Shona, do lead us on to the Times then, because this headline, MI5 shifts focus from terrorists to rogue states, meaning China,
good news
Russia.
Yes. So China, Russia, and Iran. You do worry about these sorts of headlines and think, what is the benefit of the head of MI5, Ken McCallum, giving this interview to Simon Case, who, a familiar name, he's now the outgoing cabinet secretary. This is a podcast for civil servants, and the Times has obtained a copy, and he is talking about paring back the focus on counter-terrorism to deal with the growing threat posed by Russia and other hostile states, and making uncomfortable choices, and talking about how there was a bit of a 20 to 30 year holiday from having to think about rogue states as the sort of primary target, but that now that has to be the focus again. So, obviously this is about money, as everything is. We'd like to be able to look at all of these risks all at once. But yeah, I don't quite understand the logic of this being put out to civil servants, what the civil servants are meant to do with the information. One thing that's mentioned as well is the growing threat from terrorist threat from teenagers who've consumed too much.
Yeah, I was
of the
just
wrong
looking
things
at this
online.
line, which it's quite a curious. We've not really heard this line before.
No, 1 in 8 of those being monitored by MI5 is under 18, which does seem a lot.
That's mad. Yeah. And I think it's also quite interesting, isn't it, that this headline implies that terrorists and rogue states are two separate things. Where, of course, if you think about recent years, security threats have been sort of state-sponsored terrorism, whether it be the Skripals and the Russians and that sort of stuff. So I don't know I wonder if, again, whether the podcast allowed the head of MI5 to quite convey the nuance of the body's position on this, because I can't imagine that you can completely separate those two things.
Yeah, it almost feels like they're kind of talking about terrorists as lone wolf teenagers in their bedrooms, as if there's that, and then there's something that Russia might do, and there's no kind of crossover, which I agree is a bit of a false distinction, but maybe just helps for headline purposes.
And we're seeing it, across Europe, elections and TikTok and the interference of platforms like that being a huge problem.
It is, and I think, especially for young men, there is a growing problem of extremism and radicalisation. Although I think actually across age groups that sort of extremism is on the rise. So it's right for, I suppose, MI5 to be worried
ahead
about
of that.
it. Yeah, ahead of that. But I just think, that really stands out as so many young people being driven to extremism. I wonder if, obviously, we've just recently had the Australian government banning TikTok for 16 and unders, and I really wouldn't be surprised if at some point over the next 5 years we see our Labour government following suit.
Okay, let's move on to the Daily Telegraph now, and this will be alarming to lots of people heading into winter. Well, we're already in winter. Energy bills may rise in nuclear power push, Christian.
Yeah, so this is something being actually pushed for by industry chiefs rather than actually the government itself. So what industry leaders are proposing would be that you sort of add a few quid onto the annual energy bill, which then goes towards building nuclear power stations and is then recouped by investors over time, as I think similarly happened with the new super sewer across the Thames in London. I mean, obviously, this is very tricky because I think all governments, actually all of the main parties in Britain are now ostensibly pro-nuclear power in a way that they weren't necessarily 15, 20 years ago. But then how do you actually build that given the costs? Now, the government, I think, will also be trying to fold in nuclear power development with its wider planning reforms. That is one of the biggest issues that nuclear power has in this country. And I know that, especially under the previous government, we know they're not talking about Hinkley Points, and it's massive. They're talking about small nuclear reactors that could be in smaller towns. Now, a Whitehall source has said that the government is open to more nuclear, but it needs less public funding and more private funding. Which seems
we've heard that a lot,
eminent. We have heard that before.
And Labour also saying they've always wanted to push green energy and GB energy too, and that's how bills will be cut in the long term. A lot of long-term thinking, I suppose, when there is a crisis right now.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, the question of what is the best kind of green, what is green energy, what's the best kind, and the fact that so many other governments, national governments, are profiting from our renewable energy in Britain. I think people will just go, again, it's actually the British consumers that lose out, regardless of the fact that it's being produced in this country. We'll get shafted one way or another.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. We'll squeeze more in the next hour. But Shona and Christian, thank you so much for your company. We'll be back after a short break.